up high, and the dreams that you dream of once in a lullaby. Oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. Dreams that you dream of, dreams really do come true. Ooh, someday you wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like lemon drops, high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, and the dreams that you dare to, oh why can't I? Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like a lemon drops, high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, and the dreams that you dare to, why, oh why can't I?
Cause you're a sky full of stars. I'm gonna give you my heart. Cause you're a sky full of stars. Cause you light up the park. I don't care, go on and tear me apart. I don't care if you do. Cause in the sky full of stars, I think I saw you. Cause you're a sky full of stars. I wanna die in your arms. Cause you get lighter the more it gets dark. I'm gonna give you my heart. I don't care, go on and tear me apart. I don't care if you do.
afternoon. A beautiful day to celebrate a beautiful life and a life of consequence. On behalf of the Gillespie family, I would like to welcome everyone to today's celebration of life for Duff Gillespie. Duff touched many lives over his lifetime, from his family to those he mentored, to those he led, to those he taught, to those he inspired, and to the literally millions of women in the developing world today who have access to family planning and reproductive health services, thanks to his leadership and contributions over a career that spans more than 50 years. Over the next hour, we will hear from the following speakers: Mark Gillespie, Steve Sidning, Sarah Clark, John Dunn, Al Summer, Amy Choi, Beth Frederick, and me, Scott Radloff. We will close with the reading of the epic poem, Ode to Duff, when I will be joined by Roy Jacobstein. So without further ado, let us begin. Mark.
First, on behalf of the Gillespie family, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. There's two people in particular that we'd like to thank. First is Scott for being our MC today and also assembling the slideshow, which you can see. Each of those is a big task. Both is enormous. Thank you. We'd also like to thank Sabrina Karklins for helping to coordinate all of the invitations that went out, and it's kind of appropriate that you helped with this, as you were my dad's go-to IT support, so thank you for helping Joanne with these IT tasks as well. 35 years ago, my dad and I sat in a rental car in St. Louis's Forest Park. We were devouring a gooey butter cake, which is a local delicacy, and kind of laughing at the absurdity of it all because it was an already gooey delight that was melting in the Midwestern heat. It was really turning into a puddle, and we had just finished a campus tour of Washington University in St. Louis. At the time, I was still in high school, considering my college choices, and WashU intrigued me enough to make the visit. So I was sitting in this car faced with a dilemma. Should I apply early decision to WashU, which essentially commits me to attending if accepted? It was a high-stakes choice, and remarkably, one thing my dad never told me is what he thought I should do. It would have been completely understandable if he wanted me to attend his alma mater where he met Joanne. Completely understandable if he wanted his son within 2.5 hours drive of his mother who lived in Cairo, Illinois. It would have been completely understandable if he just wanted me to go to St. Louis to adopt the St. Louis Cardinals, his beloved team, as my team. But no, this was entirely my decision. There was no speech, no pressure, no, it would mean a lot to me if none of that. We just enjoyed the cake. I did go to WashU, not because it was expected, but because I wanted. And while I may not have fully appreciated it at the time, I'm sure I was following his quiet example. Now that I think of it, I can't remember a time when my dad ever told me what to do. He just showed me. He lived a life of purpose and integrity. He embraced moments of laughter and joy. He faced the difficult times with bravery. He was an inspiration. 20 years after that college visit, I had another big life event. Quinn was born. Jenny and I were first-time parents. Once again, he was right there to support us. He believed, I think, that his job as grandpa was to read Quinn, George, and Martha stories and later to teach her how to cook steak. And basically, just love her unconditionally. He never once told Jenny and me how to be better parents. Not one piece of unsolicited advice. He supplied the love and support and gave Jenny and me the space to figure the rest out. By the way, the rest includes changing diapers. That's one thing he never did. You gotta have your limits. In a few minutes, as Scott said, you'll hear about his illustrious 60-year career, his extensive world travels, and the lives he impacted here and around the world. He was all in on work. But family was first. He was always there for me and my brother Reed, not just in the big moments like the college visits and the grandchildren, but also the small everyday things, like music rehearsals, soccer games, and Boy Scouts. Maybe not always Boy Scouts. You see, Reed stuck with Scouts for years and eventually became an Eagle Scout. I lasted 1 year in Indian Guides before my dad abruptly pulled me out. Years later, Reed and I asked him why. His answer was simple. The dads in Reed's troop were cool. They would send the kids down into the basement to glue together headdresses or plywood racers or whatever, while the dads stayed upstairs enjoying beer. The dads in my troop, a bunch of no fun dorks. Okay, so I guess maybe there was one time that he did tell me what to do. Again, you've got to have your limits. The reason he enjoyed such a remarkable career and a remarkable family was my mom. In 1966, they got married and promptly moved to London for a year. Somehow they didn't kill each other despite living in a dusty, cramped, one-bedroom flat and living off of beans and toast. What followed was a wonderful 59-year marriage. My dad showed me what it looks like to be a loving, supportive husband. Again, not by telling. He's never one for Valentine's poetry or flowers, just by showing. He was always there for my mom. She was always there for him. They were a true team. In fact, I can't remember them ever being out of sync, except perhaps for how often he should buy a luxury car. In fact, and this is true, he's currently on the waiting list for a new Porsche, so if any of you are interested in taking his spot, please see me after. Cars were one of his many passions. When he loved something, he was all in. Home brewing, squash, smoking meat, British mysteries, World War II history. He didn't dabble, he immersed. So when I try to pull all of this together, the quiet example, the fierce love of family, the passions pursued wholeheartedly, I come back to this. My dad lived fully, he worked hard, he loved his family deeply. He never showed me how to live, he just showed me. I was lucky to have him as my dad, and I love him. Thank you.
Before I start, Liz McGuire, who succeeded Duff as director of the population office at USAID, who is not well, particularly wanted all of you to know how much she would like to have been here and to send her greetings to all of you and her best wishes to Joanne and the boys. Many who've known and worked with Duff over the years think of him as a hard-nosed realist and a demanding boss, and he was both. But I prefer to think of Duff, the Duff I knew and admired, as an idealist and a crusader. And it's in that light that I'd like to celebrate his extraordinary career. Duff and I joined USAID's Office of Population, as it was then called, around the same time, at the beginning of the 1970s. Duff must have been a freshman at Washington University when John Kennedy was elected, and I know he was inspired by Kennedy's call to public service. He spent time after receiving his doctorate at the Office of Economic Opportunity, but heard about USAID's fledgling population program from his friend Tim Spray, and decided it looked like a place where he might succeed in making a difference. And he certainly did. Duff was tasked by the legendary first director of the office, Ray Ravenholm, to initiate a program of research programs to test his hypothesis that ready access to free or inexpensive modern contraception at the community or even at the household level would enthusiastically be adopted by women, many of whom he believed were eager to manage their fertility. At the time, this hypothesis was, to say the least, highly controversial. So Duff set about designing and then overseeing the implementation of what came to be called in the office an operations research program. To make a long story short, the program basically confirmed Ravenholt's conviction and served as a powerful evidence-based foundation upon which to confidently build a program globally of contraceptive service and delivery. Without the results produced by the research Duff supported at, among other places, Menufia Governorate in Egypt, and especially Matlab Bazar in Bangladesh, I doubt that the global program of population assistance USAID built throughout the 1970s and 1980s would have been possible. This early engagement in rigorous research presaged a career of total commitment to evidence-based programming and policymaking. Duff never veered from this commitment, which served him, but more particularly the agency and the global movement, extremely well. Whether he was designing a project, advocating a policy, briefing senior officials and members of Congress, or directing his staff, Duff maintained a strict adherence to research and science in the service of policies and programs. Imagine how he despaired as he watched the current administration take a wrecking ball, not only to the agency he served so well for so long, but to the entire government-supported national research establishment. I had joined the Office of Population shortly before Duff, and after a 4-year stint in Washington, decided to get involved in USAID programs overseas. After assignments in Pakistan and the Philippines, I returned to Washington in 1983. By this time, as a result of his proven skills as a manager, his success with the Operations Research Program, and his large personality, Duff had become chief of the research division and had just been made deputy director of the office. Through a weird series of political events, I was suddenly thrust into the directorship of the office, and Duff and I found ourselves working together to lead it. Against most expectations, including, I hasten to say, our own, Duff and I actually became a successful partnership. In large part, I believe, because despite the similarity of our academic training, we were very different people. And our experience at USAID were very different. I was an extrovert, Duff was an introvert. I had served more than 6 years in the field, Duff was Washington-based. My approach as a manager was relatively gentle and involved much positive reinforcement. Duff was tough and often critical. Our styles of good cop, bad cop, and roles as outsider-insider, while occasionally generating disagreement between us, worked pretty well, I think, in terms of outcomes. And most importantly, we were joined at the hip in terms of our commitment to the program and our willingness to fight for it. As I said, we didn't always agree, as for example, when I pushed for a National Academy of Sciences review of the evidence on the impact of rapid population growth and economic development that Duff was worried might backfire. It did. And the result was a political setback for the program. Another less consequential disagreement was over whether we should sit for an interview with a journalist from Playboy magazine who caught wind of the fact that our office was the world's largest purchaser of condoms. Duff counseled against it, but I thought we should go ahead. The result was the infamous Rubbers from Ronnie program article. By the time it appeared, I had moved on to become the director of the USAID mission in Kenya. Duff called me to give me a heads up about what he was sure was about to hit the fan. And I might say that call there was a gleeful note in his voice as he called me. He anticipated the worst, but in the end, everyone had a good laugh, and life went on. I learned a great deal from Duff about how family planning programs work, and I think he learned a lot from me about the importance of public policy and how to generate political support for programs. We learned much from each other about how to manage staff, in the process overcoming our own most glaring weaknesses, and we became good friends. A friendship forged in the Mexico City global gag rule cauldron that began boiling in 1984 and has been boiling ever since. How well I remember trips from Administrator Peter McPherson's office back across the Potomac to our office in Roslyn, asking each other whether we should resign in protest over Reagan administration policies or stay to fight on. Eventually, I left to go back to the field, but Duff fought on valiantly, and I believe with McPherson's help, actually saved the program. Duff's and my careers intertwined after I retired from USAID. We served together on the U.S. delegation to the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo in 1994, and I twice participated in evaluations of his advanced family planning program at Hopkins. But others will speak here eloquently, I'm sure, about those years. In closing, I can say in all honesty that no one has had more of an influence on my professional life than Duff Gillespie, and I dare say there are many gathered here today who would say something similar. Duff was very smart, he was direct, he was deeply committed to the cause, he had a devilish sense of humor, and underneath that gruff exterior, a warm heart and an abiding loyalty to his wide circle of friends and colleagues. I know I speak for all of us when I say his death leaves a very large hole in the field of global health, including sexual and reproductive health, and most especially family planning. He will be sorely missed. Sarah.
So Duff didn't really like me when we first met. I came to the program about, I guess, 5 years after Steve and Duff were already there. And I was afraid of him. I was a brand new analyst in the Office of Population at USAID. I'd never had a job before. I'd never even been in an office. And he was the rising star of the research division, as Steve just mentioned. And he had just won, of all things, a government-wide award called the Arthur S. Fleming Award. And I mean, he was like a star at USAID. As we've already mentioned, he's a person of few words, but they were very carefully chosen. And unlike maybe your experience as his son, he definitely told me what to do. We sometimes called him Gruff Duff, okay? He had a temper too, you know. He was very intimidating in a culture that actually, as many in this room can testify, was not all that welcoming to women at that time. Yeah. But our relationship totally changed when 4 years later I joined the Foreign Service and moved to West Africa. Now, Duff's idea of Foreign Service pretty much included Geneva and London. But he occasionally took side trips to Cairo or Nairobi or maybe Matlab. But he was genuinely respectful of and very supportive of field officers. Those are the ones we considered the front lines at that time at USAID, yeah. So by the time was out, he had already risen to be the office the office director, and I was invited back to be his deputy. He, Liz McGuire, and I shared this beautiful suite of offices on the top floor of a State Department annex in Roslyn, looking back over the Potomac at the DC Mall. We were there sunrise and sunset, so we got all the views of the mall, which was great. When we had meetings across the river at Main State, where our political bosses hung out, and many foreign service officers also had their offices, we had to take a really inconvenient shuttle or drive over there. And when we would have to go into the basement and hand our keys over to these parking attendants who freely knocked cars around. I mean, you know, they weren't their cars. And this is the setting for my all-time favorite Duff story. And it has to do with cars. He always had the finest wheels. I mean, at the time he had a top-of-the-line Mercedes 500 sedan or something, I don't know, something very fancy. And I drove a car that didn't really show a ding or two, right? It was, I think the word was clunker, yeah, we said that. When he came back one day, very distressed, anyway, we always drove my car, obviously, because he didn't want his car to get a ding. So he came back one day very distressed, really very upset, and I thought, oh my goodness, something terrible's happened to our program. You know, we've been some congressional inquiry or something. And he had actually reported that the driver's side door on my car had been crashed in, and he had had to drive it back, crawling in and out from the passenger side. Okay. Now, if this were he was actually projecting that I would feel like he would feel, right? And I just laughed. I thought it was hysterical. You know, it was inconvenient for a few days while I got in and out the passenger side, and the few days when I had to get it fixed and all that. But it was so great to have something to hold over him, you know. So, Duff, you want to take my car? Just go ahead, here are the keys, you know. And we laughed about that for years. Yeah. Eventually, I left AID and moved to the Packard Foundation in California. And as the reproductive health program grew there, we invited Duff, along with many other people in this room today, to form an expert advisory committee. We worked together closely to expand and develop the program internationally, especially in the early years. And when Duff got ready to retire from his DC job, the Packard Foundation recruited him as a visiting scholar there to give him a break between being a high-powered bureaucrat to becoming an academic. And it's there that he worked to develop the brilliant program that became Advanced Family Planning at Hopkins. But he also provided leadership all across the foundation. And we took advantage of that years later when Lou Platt was the former CEO of HP, the chair of the board of Boeing Corporation, and, as it happens, the Packard Foundation, died suddenly 1 week before a trip that the foundation had worked years putting together to Pakistan, of all places. And we had also confirmed a meeting between our delegation and the president of Pakistan. And on just a week's notice, Duff stepped in to take his place so the meetings could go ahead and we could go ahead and represent the work of the Packard Foundation, try to encourage the government of Pakistan to become a little bit more proactive on reproductive health and family planning. But while he was out in California, we worked on Duff too. He was really skeptical of California woo-woo. I mean, you can just imagine, right? That we used in our weekly team building. But as a result of being out there, he became a more chill, laid-back person. I really think so. I think it was that we can take credit for that. I remember at one of the many team building things we did yoga classes, and he wouldn't condescend even to bend over. He would just stand there and laugh. He would just lean up against the column and laugh. But the one that really got him was when a consultant from HeartMath taught us how to breathe. Okay, so he would say, to start our meetings and get everybody in a good place to be productive and all that. So he would say, had us visualize a rosy image and take deep cleansing breaths and then breathe directly through our hearts to start our staff meetings in the right tone. I mean, and Duff just thought that was ridiculous. You know? Yeah. I don't know if he ever caught the knack or not. But whether I was in California or overseas, he and Joanne always had me over. We became even closer friends. When I came back to DC after Packard, and we all together participated in a monthly Ethiopian eating club. Okay. So we were trying, international visitors, local people, and Duff and Joanne, and we would just go out, and every month we needed a new Ethiopian restaurant. So that became a very important social connection for all of us. It was really great. So, and also the Ethiopian food in this area is really good. Luckily for me, our career paths crossed and recrossed. He became such a valuable colleague and a friend. And so I'm very honored to be here and say these few words about him today. I really miss him. I thank you for your attention, and I'm going to hand this over to John Dunn. Thank you.
Sure is difficult to follow Sarah's talk. It's really difficult for me to adequately put into words my long friendship with Duff. It was filled with so many large and meaningful moments. The highs and the lows of work and home. Those memories of sharing wins in efforts to make life better for the poorest families in the globe, as well as enduring the political absurdities launched to undermine our work, and to share time with our families together, be it a Passover dinner or home-cooked dinners at each other's homes. The passing of Duff, our dear friend and colleague, reminds us more broadly of what can be achieved by enduring commitment, intellect, and grit to make a profound impact in so many lives. For me, as for many in this room, our personal friendship as well as our professional relationship not only endured for years, but grew and matured into our more elderly decades. While some of us may have sensed that Duff's health was failing, we became so optimistic when Joanne brought him home from the hospital. Yet, very deep inside, we knew her decision to bring Duff home was such a wonderful act of love. It allowed him to pass in the loving care of his family in his home without the circle of white coats. I still wanted to talk to him about politics, the demise of USAID, the profoundly flawed human being in the White House, what was going on with our kids and our spouses, and of course I wanted to know what fancy new Mercedes he was buying. But as many of us older folks in this room know, I just wanted to talk with him because of our friendship, his unique intelligence, his strength and his humor, and yes, those sharp, biting observations of his. How many times do many of us in this room remember when Duff stepped up to change or stop an important decision coming either from inside the federal bureaucracy or from the many outside political attacks that were so common, especially in the early years of the program? Many of you in this room have so many anecdotes and experiences of working and becoming friends with Duff. We could all spin many a story of knowing him and his work. One thing for sure, and it is reflected in the presence of so many of his colleagues and friends here today, and that is we all recognize the long, profound, positive impact he had on the lives of the poorest women on earth. One of the last conversations I had with Duff was over the phone. I said to him that I bet I take more prescription medicines than he did. "How many do you take?" asked Duff. I told him my fairly large number. His number was at least twice mine. But given how healthy and robust he appeared to be the last time we shared a meal together with our spouses, I thought, oh my God, he's going to live a lot longer than I thought. For those who came to know you, Duff, we thank you for being such a unique and wonderful friend and colleague. Not bad at all, my friend. Not bad at all. So, Duff, save a seat for me wherever you are. We still have so much to talk about what happened to us here on Earth. Joanne, Reed, and Mark, you had one hell of a husband and father in your lives. Everyone in this room and beyond send all our love to you, Joanne, and to you, Mark and Reed.
I knew little of Duff's extraordinary accomplishments when I first met him. He was then involved in overseeing the Office of Nutrition, for which I was receiving considerable support. At one point, our long-standing USAID nutrition officer, who had been very supportive, began to fall off the rails. Not doing harm to us, but to our cause and rigorous science-based policy, running the unfolding story of our understanding of the role of vitamin A deficiency in the health of young children in the developing world, which was my area of investigation. I had heard that Duff was bright, thoughtful, approachable, and effective in sorting out issues professionally and firmly. We met for a beer one evening in D.C. Beer, as I understand, is a recurring theme about Duff, though he and I usually quaffed wine. I was then Dean of the Hopkins School of Public Health, trying to strengthen our Department of Population. I struck pay dirt in recruiting Amy Choi, who will be the next speaker, to lead our new Gates Institute. Upon subsequently learning that Duff was retiring and would spend some time at Packard, Amy suggested we try to recruit him as a senior, established, effective leader in the field. I knew nothing about the specifics, but I did know him and his reputation. Pursuing Duff was a no-brainer. Fortunately, we were successful. Amy will discuss his role at Hopkins. I only need to emphasize my seconding her assessment. Now, one of the most best outcomes of all, at least for me and my wife Jill, is that we came to know Duff and Joanne, and we get together with them regularly. One of our favorite destinations was Frederick, Maryland. We would spend many a day enjoying the lively town, lunch, and usually music. Yes, Duff did introduce me to a number of beers I had never heard of. Duff and I shared several interests, and we will not be surprised to hear one of them was cars. We had very different tastes in those days. Mine was a little soft-top Porsche Boxer, and I'm really delighted to hear he's on the waiting list for a Porsche. And if Duff, as you've heard, had this huge Mercedes electric vehicle. When he and Joanne first drove up in it in the spring, I admired the car, but shared my concern about the limited range of electric vehicles, particularly those as big and heavy as that Mercedes. Duff assured me that his monster got 350 miles a charge. I was impressed. When we next got together in the spring, I asked how the car was doing. He replied somewhat sheepishly, "Fine, except in the winter." He and Joanne were apparently driving to New York when they discovered that the cold destroys a battery's range and had to seek out a charge huddled in the cold long before arriving at their destination. On another outing, we decided to visit the Baltimore Basilica, which had just undergone renovation. The church was empty except for a middle-aged nun who was happy to show us the unusual basement supporting structure. As we emerged, Cardinal Keeler, a beloved member of the Baltimore community, emerged from the back and we approached one another. As always, he was gracious, extended his hand and asked me what parish I was from. Being Jewish, I had absolutely no idea. I mumbled something about Johns Hopkins because I had encountered him in a variety of functions on campus. As we left, Duff said sotto voce, "Geez, Johns Hopkins." We last got together with Duff and Joanne what proved to be 2 weeks before he passed. I can assure everyone, we consumed considerable wine with dinner, not beer. Duff and I compared the number of drugs we were taking, even though he looked to be in perfect health and humor. Amy?
You all will notice recurring themes in our comments about Duff. So I'm Amy Choi. I'm a retired professor at Johns Hopkins. I directed the Gates Institute, where Duff was a senior fellow from 2004 until he retired in 2024. And I want to begin by expressing my heartfelt and my husband's heartfelt condolences to the Gillespie family for the loss of Duff as a husband, father, brother, and grandfather, and to acknowledge that your family's loss is shared deeply by the international development community. Duff's professional reach was vast. His personal impact was even greater. We knew him as someone who brought strong leadership, rigorous analysis, and genuine compassion for the complex challenges of global development. Thank you, Joanne, for the invitation to speak. I suspect I'm here because years ago, I, and eventually Al, managed to persuade Duff to join our then newly established institute after he completed his residency at Packard. To this day, I consider it one of my finest recruitment achievements. Convincing someone as distinguished as Duff to trade the beauty of the Bay Area for the charms of Baltimore. And thanks to Dean Sommer, Hopkins was a clear winner from that transaction. In preparing these remarks, I came to realize how much about Duff I never knew, even after 3 decades of being colleagues, including 2 with my office just down the hall from his. I did not know that he was a Washington Post beer judge. I did not know he liked to dance. I did not know he practiced yoga after San Francisco. I did not. The high performance cars, however, were harder to miss. On occasion, I would run into Duff in the Hopkins garage, calmly parking what appeared to be his latest acquisition. That was proof that public health and horsepower were not mutually exclusive. What I always knew and deeply respected was that Duff's policymaking and advocacy were anchored in evidence. He did not argue from ideology, he argued from data. He had an uncanny ability to read the political terrain and find a principled path forward toward better decisions, equitable funding, and stronger commitments to social justice. Many of you may have seen a graph he loved to share of US funding for population programs from 1984 to 2023. It showed that presidential requests and congressional appropriations did not always align, and that even when Democrats controlled both Congress and the White House, robust funding for population assistance was never guaranteed. In fact, some of the larger gains came during the Republican administration. Duff's lesson was simple but vital. You could not take progress for granted. Population program support required vigilance, strategy, and champions on the inside, many of whom are here in this audience. When Duff finished at Packard, he was 60, an age at when many people start planning their retirement. Duff characteristically began planning his 3rd act. At Hopkins, he brought his wealth of experience into the classroom. As a professor, he bridged the then often separate worlds of policy and academia, offering students not just theoretical knowledge, but the hard-won insights of someone who had worked in the field. As a researcher, he conducted an HIV and family planning research project in Ethiopia, no doubt spurred by his Ethiopian meals. And in 2006, he organized a large regional meeting on family planning and HIV, again in Ethiopia. In 2009, he was able to launch the Advanced Family Project, which had been brewing at Packard, and it ran nearly 16 years, enabled also by other champions in the field who were at the Gates Foundation at the time and provided further support. Most people slow down in their 60s. Duff accelerated. He was a superb professor, teaching, mentoring junior faculty, advising students, and continuing to build projects around the world. He gamely traveled with me to Pakistan. I don't know if that was his first or second trip, and to Nigeria to encourage high-level officials to strengthen commitments to family planning. And he went to China with me to expand foreign assistance, encouraging them to expand foreign assistance to family planning in low-income countries. In 2004, during our Pakistan trip, we were in Peshawar, right next door to an active war in Afghanistan, which continues today. We were sponsored by the Minister of Population Welfare, who was grateful for our visit, and he provided an armed escort for our drives between the airport meetings and hotel. Real soldiers, real rifles. Duff took it all in stride, as if this were simply another Tuesday in the world of global diplomacy. I'm sure that once he was freed from USA's travel regulations for senior officials, his creativity flourished, and we all benefited. Some of these professional chapters may be as new to you as his beer judging, dancing, and yoga were to me. I can say without hesitation, though, that Duff embodied the very best of Johns Hopkins public health missions and spirit, rigor with purpose, advocacy grounded in evidence, and an unshakable belief that policy could improve people's lives. He brought his intellect, courage, strategic savvy, and apparently a surprising range of extracurricular talents to the position. We were extraordinarily fortunate to work beside him. Thank you.
So it's not a competition, but I'm convinced that I got the best version of Duff. And proof of that is that on my way to Costco a couple months ago, a month and a half ago, I got a call in the car, and it was Duff, and he said, "Beth, I think I'm going to die." And I thought, oh my God, what could that be? You've had 9 lives already. And he, he was a straight shooter. Duff was my boss, my co-teacher, my friend. I knew of him for almost all of my working life, but not very well until he and Sabrina Cartlins brought me to Baltimore and the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health to work with them on advanced family planning, the advocacy project that we led together for 15 plus years. Duff was a showman, the person who's larger than life, the guy who comes into town with a big idea, one that no one saw coming, that local folks thought couldn't be done. And with his ICFP backpack, ball cap, and cane, he'd tell the people that even though the world is going to the dogs, gosh darn it, or usually something more spicy, we can do it. We can change the world. Because when you work with Duff, you have no choice but to believe you can. When I read the proposal for advanced family planning, I fully expected it to fail. It was underfunded, complicated, and focused on an approach that Duff was convinced could be used for effective advocacy. But I was wrong. With Duff, AFP folks were often, quote, wrong. But we were also respected for our own thoughts and ideas. By the end, the partnerships we formed achieved 3,000 advocacy wins, and mobilized $170 million for family planning. The secret behind the success was Duff's determination, his intellect, and his confidence that people want to do the right thing. He was the guy who inspired greatness, loathed inertia, and truly admired the colleagues in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, who came to be known as the AFP family. He was forever frustrated that progress wasn't being made fast enough. He was also the person who treasured a cold beer, a spin on the dance floor, and the many people who valued his wisdom, including every student, every ally, and even some with whom he would never see eye to eye. He never backed down from a fight. To Joanne and the family, thank you for sharing Duff with all of us. And in the spirit of his love of interactivity, I'm going to end with a quiz, which I regret has no prizes. So, question number 1. What is Duff's favorite hotel?
The Dodge.
Very good, Marvin. or what he used to call you Marvin. Okay, Marvin. Very good, the Taj Hotel. Who is Duff's favorite singer?
Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga. And what is Duff's favorite word? Penultimate. Duff, thank you for everything. I wish we were still in the penultimate.
By the time I joined the Office of Population in 1983, Duff had already been at USAID for 10 years. He had recently been promoted to deputy director and already had a larger-than-life persona. Duff was a tough taskmaster and expected a high level of performance from his staff. He was not hesitant to speak his mind when anything had gone awry. You did not want to be called on the carpet with Duff. I was fresh out of graduate school and was trying to make a first good impression in my first real job. I am an early riser, and I always made it a point to be the first in the office each day, and I dutifully made the first pot of coffee each morning. Imagine my horror when I was told within days that Duff wanted to see me in his office. "Your coffee," Duff said, "is weak." Weak. You didn't want to be associated with the word weak when dealing with Duff, no matter the context. That was strike one. Strike two came soon after. I was asked to prepare a budget analysis that included some mathematics. Sarah Clark was my boss at the time, and she and I both graduated from demography at Brown University. Sarah reviewed the analysis, and Duff called us both into his office to go over it. Duff was surprised to discover a simple math error. And I'm not talking about a rounding error. It was a $1 million error, that type of error. He asked what the heck was going on with Brown academic standards. Sarah and I never lived this down. That was strike two. Thankfully, strike three never came. Duff was not one to suffer fools gladly, and there was always a steady stream of fools that crossed his path over the years at USAID. In my view, he was just the type of person we needed to lead and defend a program that was so frequently a lightning rod, a program that could easily have been compromised out of existence. Duff was not one to shy away from a fight, and not one to wither from pressure. And there was pressure. If it wasn't someone trying to impede or even kill the program, it was a problem with a procurement, a commodity shipment, a tasker to respond to a question from Congress, or an implementation challenge in any one of 50+ countries where we worked. And just as a side note, and those of you who played for the office softball team, the famed Pop Flies, will know that our mascot was Proud Pete the Condom. This is our t-shirt. And you can see that our motto was pressure tested. Pressure tests applied to both the billions of condoms that we purchased over the years, and it applied to us, who lived under a pressure cooker condition in the fast-paced, high-flying office of population. We faced a constant barrage of challenges, never a dull moment. I remember being called by Duff into emergency meetings to discuss the response to a particular threat, and his rallying us at the end of the meeting with a cry of "battle stations, everyone." And we knew that we had to drop everything to take on the assignment and address the threat. The threats and attacks mostly came externally, often from a member of Congress, a pro-life advocacy group, a conservative think tank, or the occasional fringe academic. But they also came from within the agency, from a political appointee or a high-ranking official who had an in for our program for one reason or another. After leaving USAID, Duff would tell us that he was nearly fired 3 times. And he would always add with a chortle, 3 times that I know of. Duff's service at USAID was extraordinary. He led a high visibility, high intensity set of health programs for the better part of his full career. I can hardly imagine a higher stress career than the one that he had at USAID. When he left the agency in 2003, he was heading for a seemingly cushy job at the Packard Foundation as a senior fellow. Duff was more ebullient than anyone had ever seen before. And he would say at that time that it was a bittersweet moment in his career. And then he would clarify with a guffaw, "Bitter for you, sweet for me." And it was a sweet time in his life from all accounts. I think I can speak for most everyone that we were having a hard time imagining Duff in California. Could California actually mellow Duff? The hard-driving Duff Gillespie? The odds, most would say, were against it. But I believe that Duff did become more easygoing, more open-minded, yes, more mellow. It could have been the lowered level of stress. It could have been his liberation from a federal bureaucracy. But it well could have been just the vibe of California. And many of us observed this change, so much so that we began referring to him as New Duff. Just like New Coke. Few have had such a consequential impact on the international contraceptive revolution that we've seen over the past 60 years, and work with such passion for reproductive health and rights. I was always amazed at how he kept working at it even into his 80s. Duff Gillespie was an inspiration to me, as he was to many. A great colleague, a man of many talents, a man of consequence, a dear friend. So Roy Jacobstein and I penned Ode to Duff back in 2003 as an homage to Duff as he was leaving USAID to join the Packard Foundation. We fashioned the poem after the Keats' classic poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn. We held Duff's gala retirement celebration right here in DC at the Ooh La La Club. And there we read the poem to Duff's roaring approval. One of Duff's many admirable qualities was his quick wit and appreciation of humor, an important quality for any leader, in my view. And he could take a joke as well as dish them out. And the comedy we shared via the skit performances of the Pop-Tarts and then the comedy cluster contributed to the camaraderie that held our staff together through thick and thin for over 50 years.
We updated this poem just 4 years ago in 2022 and read it at the Pop Staff Reunion, introduced with some patter and maintaining the Keats's flowery language that you will be able to see if you have a copy of the poem.
In the patter, we created a conceit that the poem had gained critical acclaim across the US. Sadly, however, sales had lagged. But we learned that it was selling like hotcakes in Paris. This was a complete mystery to us until we learned that the poem's title had been mistranslated to Ode to a Derriere.
We further updated the poem for our reading today as we gather to honor and celebrate Duff's life.
And we bring it to you right now.
Ode to Duff. Yea, thou intrepid chief of USAID, thou paragon of global health, removed from the ivied corridors of academe, cast into the emergent fields of pop and health. Yea, thou who didst deploy courageous troops to vanquish unmet need and dread disease.
What leaf-fringed legend fills thy Adonis-like shape? What burdens doth thy shoulders bear? From subordinates so oft unruly, to appointees political with knowledge so deplete. From taskers cascading from the halls of Congress, to procurement officers ever impeding thy path. Yea, were it not for legal and congressional affairs, how oft hath thy bacon been saved?
Ah, happy, happy popflies days that welcome the spring and bid winter adieu, with the attendant sounds that resonate, the crack of young Grossie's bat, the whir of Bailey's elusive pitch, the rasping skid as Crowley evades the catcher's tag, with thou at first base, unwearied and bold.
And with the score tied and victory in doubt, with the crowd holding its breath as one, lo, observe Duff's towering batted drive, whistling as it cuts through the sweet, crisp air, deep into the Cherrydale woods, and vanishing like travel funds.
Hark! What distant sounds reverberate in memory? Is it the sound of Bissell whose vacuum you didst fill? Or is it Byrne whose mission closures impair thy work? Or perchance Roskins, Atwood, Natsios? No, no, none of these, as none could they, nor time itself, dampen your company's esprit de corps.
Lo, the sound doth resonate from the lore of Ravenholtian and Spidelian rain, and from Sinding, who hath so rallied the troops to brave the scourge unleashed that fateful day in Mexico. O artist who did paint, O sculptor who did shape the very grounds that undergird thy command.
And how hast thou inspired thy forces, those in services both civil and foreign, and the ever valiant FSNs, and of those commanding thy throngs, Maguire, protector of rights reproductive, and Noisa, who served with valor in far-flung posts, and Radloff, yea, he who conquered metered funds.
And forget not young Starbird and De Silva, who hath so well endured against an orange-hued menace, armed with weaponry untold. And when ye gather with interns and neps, and they ask of the wisdom of your years, tell them of the beauty of thy legion's mission.
For beauty is truth, and truth beauty. Such are the verdant fields of pop and health, and that is all ye know on earth, yea, and all ye need to know, in Africa, Asia, or wherever region else ye go. Thy cries of battle stations still echo, as we fare thee well, our stalwart hero.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you, all of our speakers. I now invite you to reassemble in the reception hall to catch up with others and to share your memories of Duff. The reception hall is just to your right as you exit. You will find an assembly of memorabilia and documents that may help spark your memories, those in a hutch within the reception hall. And included there are books on World War II and population that were Duff's. We offer them to take with you today. At the reception, we are serving pork sliders, one of Duff's barbecue specialties. And they're accompanied by a pimento cheese spread, a childhood favorite that Duff often prepared. Kelly Welburn, who has been taping this ceremony for the benefit of those unable to attend Duff's celebration of life today, she'll be setting up to videotape those who would like to share their stories and remembrances of Duff. All of the recordings will be posted on Duff's In Memoriam page on the Gates Institute website. So now please join me and others in the reception hall. Thank you.
My name is Jane Trowbridge Bertrand. I'm a professor emerita at the Tulane University Weatherhead School of Public Health. And I go back to 1980 with Duff Gillespie. In 1979, I was a recent graduate of the University of Chicago. I was working with my mentor, Donald Bogue. And Bogue was very interested in promoting family planning in Latin America. We'd worked together on an unsolicited proposal about Brazil. I can't even remember why Brazil. I had no experience there, nor did he. But we had this great idea for what we were going to do in Brazil. And we, coincidentally, about 6 months beforehand, I had visited the country of Zaire. I was amazed by the rapid population growth there. I mean, kids everywhere, no family planning program. So I come to Washington with my mentor, Donald Bogue, and in the formal meetings, we're promoting this great idea we had for Brazil. But afterwards, kind of over lunch or whatever, I started talking about this recent trip I'd made to Kinshasa, then Zaire, and I couldn't believe it. How is it that they don't have a stronger family planning program? I was coming out of Latin America, where by then family planning was very well established. And so as we were getting ready to leave, Duff looked at Don Bogue and myself and he said, "We have no interest in your Brazil idea. However, if you do want to submit an unsolicited proposal for family planning in Zaire, we would be very receptive to that." And in retrospect, it was the beginning of the 1980s when USAID was trying to get more involved in some of the large countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So talk about timing. I was the right place at the right time. So I consider that for that decade of the 80s, Tulane continued to work in family planning in the country. I didn't set foot in it for 20 years afterwards. And only in 2010 did Monica Kerrigan call me up and say, "Jane, the Gates Foundation is interested in reinvesting in the DRC. Is this something you'd like to do?" And what's relevant there is that first, yes, we said yes, we were. We got back in and soon became a partner on advanced family planning. So that was my second chapter of working with Duff Gillespie, and he has certainly been a mentor to many of us, and I consider myself honored to be on that list.
I'm Cynthia Minkovitz, Chair of the Department of Population, Family, and Reproductive Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I am one of the many who have always been a huge fan of Duff Gillespie's. Duff is bigger than life and always will be. He had an illustrious career before joining us on the faculty at Johns Hopkins, and he continued to be illustrious at Johns Hopkins, where so many staff, trainees, and faculty adored just getting a few moments of his time to learn from and with him, to be inspired, and to have the courage and energy to move forward with their passions. So to all who didn't have the pleasure of meeting Duff, you may have missed out, but his legacy, his legend, and his impact will live on forever.
My name's John Seeger. I'm the president of Population Connection, formerly Zero Population Growth, and probably still better known by that name. And I got to know Duff primarily through his role as a board member at Population Connection. A confession, first of all, I am one of those people who tends to talk in the hope that an idea will occur to me along the way. Duff was the opposite. When Duff didn't have anything to say, he wouldn't say it. But when he did have something to say, there was a point and a purpose to it, and it would behoove one to pay attention because it was worth listening to. I have found over the years, working with many different board members, that the best ones are people who ask tough, probing questions, but mostly vote yes, and that was Duff. I learned a very specific lesson from him while he was on the board. We had another board member whose certitude was only matched by their lack of knowledge. And this particular board member would occasionally opine at length during a board meeting. When they were done, Duff handled it perfectly. He would turn to that board member and say he agreed completely with everything they had said, and then completely would destroy everything they said. The board member only heard the first part, but everybody else heard the second part. And it was something I think he had learned sitting through endless bureaucratic meetings, that that's a great way to diffuse somebody who's a know-it-all who knows nothing. Duff was an incredibly good board member and a great friend of the organization, and he always gave us the benefit of straight talk, no nonsense, and he came across as gruff, but anybody who knew him knew that that was a facade, that it was his way of kind of, I guess, defending himself against the world's idiocy. But if you got to know him and he knew you and trusted you, he would give you straight answers and do it in a very kind and very direct way. And I will miss that. I had a chance to talk to him briefly, not long before he died, and every time I talked to him, I learned something, and I'm going to miss that.
I'm Monica Kerrigan, and I knew Duff from working with him at USAID and then again working with him at Hopkins and when I was at the Gates Foundation. And I just want to say what an amazing person Duff was, and that he helped so many people, but especially people like me, who at the beginning of my career, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and watching Duff fight every fight, looking at ways to elevate the importance of contraception access, contraception supplies, contraceptive services. He helped build us up. And I say us, I am one of many thousands and thousands of people that Duff kind of touched our lives. And he gave us so much, and he was tough. I got to tell you, I was scared of Duff at the beginning of my career, and I used to tiptoe when I was around his office, because if you were called in, you knew that you were going to be asked some tough questions. But I also want to thank him, because he showed me how you could be a really passionate person and deeply committed, but still also advocate for the things that you need to advocate for, whether it be in Congress, in governments, in ministries of health and ministries of finance, at different foundations. Duff stood up, and he stood up every single day for the rights of men, women, and young people to have access to contraception. And the other thing is, he was super and wicked smart, and it wasn't just contraceptive access he believed in. He believed in a lot of things, but he believed that each one of us could make a difference. And I'm just going to tell two of my stories. Is when I was out in Indonesia, we had a mission director who joined and decided that that mission director on his third day made an announcement that he wanted to close out the family planning program. And it's thanks to Duff and Margaret Noyes, who really helped me out during that time, because I was the senior reproductive health advisor, and our mission director at the time, was not somebody who was easy to work with. And thanks to Duff and Margaret, they made sure that the US government had a return on their investment in Indonesia, and he fought for me, and he fought for the funding that we needed to get the job done. And the second time was when I was at the Gates Foundation, and Duff was at the Gates Institute at the time. And it was the first time that Bill and Melinda had approved the first family planning strategy. And we were celebrating, and Duff reminded us all that we needed to advocate for more funding. And of course, I was just so happy that we had that, the first strategy done and that we had our first envelope of funding. But you know what? Duff didn't even let me celebrate that day. It was a reminder that he was constantly looking for that, opportunities for all of us to provide more funding and more support to, people around the globe. And here at his funeral, I was so touched by the stories and his amazing family. But many of us were also talking afterwards, and it was like celebrating Duff, but also challenging ourselves about like the world that we're living in now, and not enough attention being paid to the importance of investing in contraceptive access and making sure that every person who wants it should have it. So on this beautiful sunny day, Duff, I'm just saying that I miss you, and I really thank you for your friendship, your leadership, and all the support that you gave to me and so many people around the globe. So anyways, here's to Duff. Thank you.
So my name is Dan Schwartz. Duff was my uncle. So I would spend a lot of holidays at Joanne and Duff's house. And of the many memories, one of the best I have, it's more of a recurring memory, was just how well we would always eat there. Because Joanne is an excellent cook. Duff is an excellent cook as well too. And it was mentioned several times in the service about his barbecue and such things. And the one I really remember was whenever we would go there for Thanksgiving, he would always smoke a turkey breast. And it was the best turkey you ever taste. Because oftentimes you go to Thanksgiving, yeah, you're there for the turkey, but it always comes out a little dry. It was never my favorite part. I'd rather have the stuffing and the mashed potatoes. But if Duff and Joanne were making the turkey, that was a different story, because we'd get that smoked turkey breast, and it was excellent every time. He was a great uncle, and I knew he was accomplished in his professional career. I just knew him through family connections, obviously, so it was really fun to sit here today and listen to all of his former colleagues speak so highly about him and the things that he accomplished in his career. He was quick with a barb, but he could give it and he could also take it. So he was always a good sport about it, and it came back his way as well too, and that's what I always appreciated. He had that good sense of humor, and it wasn't just directed outwards, it was directed inwards too. He will be missed.
My name is Dawn LeBerry, and I had the honor and privilege of working with Duff for a number of years in many different capacities. I first started out as the head of the Family Planning Services Division in the Office of Population, and I had just come in from overseas, and we were managing, of course, one of the largest programs in USAID, family planning being at the helm of that. And one of the things that I remember about Duff the most is that he was so dedicated to the program. Obviously, it's all the women overseas who really needed family planning services. And, a number of people have said, he never backed down from a fight. And I remember, whether we were fighting Jesse Helms or the family planning Mexico City policy or metering programs overseas and just trying to get funding out, Duff always had our back. And he always made sure that no matter what happened, the programs always came first and that we were able to deliver around the world in all the countries that we served. So then I went back out overseas. I was a Foreign Service officer with USAID, and I was the Deputy Mission Director in Ghana. Then one day I got a call saying, we'd like you to come back, and there's this new bureau that's being set up. This is under President Clinton, and it's called the Global Bureau. And they said, we want you to come back and be Duff's deputy. And I said, well, I might have to think about that, because I was already overseas. And I thought, well, but finally I was convinced to come back. And it was interesting because, Duff is a straight shooter. And he and I had had a great relationship, great professional relationship, got along well. But in typical Duff fashion, the first meeting that we had was, he said to me, we get along really well and all the rest of it, but I don't think I need a deputy. And I said, well, Duff, this would have been good to know ahead of time. And it was interesting because it was a typical sort of Duff response to a bureaucratic process that, he wasn't big on bureaucracy. And I said, well, let's let's both try it out and see how it works. If it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. And that began a really extraordinary professional relationship where I have to say, Duff is a giant, and he had the vision and the smarts to really make sure that the program grew even larger than it was. And we were always the envy of other programs within USAID because, as many other people have said, we were very data-driven. And we were able to get the budget that we did because we could prove results. And one of the things I always said to staff is, look, the way that we are able to go up to the hill and to defend our cause is because we have the data behind us. We can prove how many new people we've served, how many lives we've saved, how many unwanted pregnancies have been averted around the world, and how many women have benefited, and women and children, obviously. And, it was because of that vision that he had that we were able to do that. And so we've lost a giant in the field. I know that he would be really upset about what's going on right now with the demise of USAID, not just the family planning program, but with the whole agency. And so I think if there's, one big lesson to learn from this is that as we move forward, we really have to have people of vision who are willing to stand up, not only for what they believe in, the principle of that, but also because of the benefits. And I think that's one of the key things. So I've been extraordinarily proud to serve with Duff. We got over our little hiccup, and finally he decided that maybe he actually did need a deputy. And we worked together very closely for another 4 years, and it was one of my professional highlights. So Duff, we miss you, and thank you for all the lessons learned, and thank you for a wonderful collaborative partnership and a wonderful friendship.
I'm Roy Jacobstein. I started in the Office of Population in 1986. I remember actually seeing Duff on the elevator almost within the first day that I started there. Steve Sinding hired me, but within 2 weeks he went off to Kenya, and after a couple of years I became the chief of the Office of the Information and Training Division, later the Communication Management and Training Division. Duff became the head of the Office of Population, and he had a major impact on the whole culture of the office and on my understanding of development and family planning. And then over the years, we became good friends. Duff and Scott and I used to duck out at lunch to play squash 3 times a week, and the staff used to implore me to lose to Duff so that he would come back in a good mood. I never told you that before, and you were a good player. And I left the office to become a poet, which I think would have been a choice you probably didn't follow yourself, but I'm sure you appreciated that poem because you were the center of it, and as you have been about so many things. We mentioned this in the poem. Duff was the first baseman on the Pop Flies, and Scott was the shortstop, and I was the third baseman, and neither Duff or I would make you forget like truly talented baseball players. But so it was always a somewhat of an adventure whether my throw was going to get to first base, and then it was always an adventure whether Duff was going to catch it or not. We kind of tamped that down in the poem, but and then Scott, being the great guy and nice guy that he is, I can still hear echoing him saying, "Sorry, Duff," as he either overthrew it or threw a catchable ball, but Duff didn't catch it. So Scott was the one apologizing, But yeah, it was a great place, the office, and I'm sure I speak for many of us that not only did you have a major impact, but we were all lucky to know each other and to work on such an important program. Today, various people said he modeled the importance of evidence. I mean, when I hear the horrendous political stuff going on now where they say everything's wasteful and, they're a bunch of lazy bureaucrats, that wasn't true at all. I mean, it was a tremendously capable, qualified staff, and a lot of it was in Duff's image about rigor, and I hope things come back, Duff, and if they do, your spirit will be there. So, what else? I remember you in your pink sweater when you came back from California, and you know, we're trying to impersonate a more mellow person. And I always admired your commitment, and yeah, you had a major impact on how my life rolled out. So rest in peace, amigo.